after the message that Tim Walz recorded in the immediate aftermath of another ICE shooting in Minneapolis. Now that we have some of the details of it, left a man shot in the leg. He made an immediate video appeal. Largely, I think the focus of it was to call for calm. And it seemed to be not calling for any new actions by protesters outside of saying that it is 100% within people's rights to record, as well as using what I would call fiery rhetoric. Tim Walz kind of beating the drum a bit. And now, after about, I would say something like 50, sorry, my phone, I think it started recording my audio. About 15, 16 hours, Tim Walz then released this statement. I am making a direct appeal to the president. Let's turn the temperature down, stop this campaign of retribution. This is not who we are. An appeal to Minnesotans. I know this is scary. We must speak out urgently, but also peacefully. We cannot fan the flames of chaos. That's what he wants. Now, I will say that I think Trump reading that last line is not going to make him too happy, but a general turning down of the temperature would be good for Minnesota. It'd probably be good for the country to try to stop any chaos, because last night there were vehicles that were burnt, and those riots can quickly spill out of control. If people do not feel that they have an avenue to express their rage, if they feel that there's no investigations that are being done to what they think are instances of injustice, if they feel that their voice and their impact on their local law enforcement has no impact on how laws are actually being enforced on their streets, if their neighbors are being disappeared, these are things combined with these instances of violence and the president's rhetoric of calling somebody shot in the head 3 times a terrorist with no evidence that they were a terrorist. The situation is going to reach a boiling point if it is not addressed. So this reach out for a turning down of the temperature is good. And I will say that the further this goes, the less cooperative a lot of locals could be with federal law enforcement, and the worse it could get. And I think the recent shooting on Wednesday in Minneapolis, not the last one that led to the death of Renee Good, but a more recent one that left a Venezuelan man shot in the leg. I think this instance is an example of this relationship between federal authorities and ICE essentially breaking down entirely. Let me read you the events of what happened according to the Department of Justice after the shooting. I actually believe DHS, not the Department of Justice. DHS released details of the Wednesday shooting incident. Department of Homeland Security released details of the alleged assault by a reported undocumented man that led to a federal agent opening fire Wednesday night. Agents stopped a car in Minneapolis for Julio Cesar Souza Caselas, who DHS alleges was undocumented, according to a press release. He allegedly fled the scene in his vehicle, crashed into a parked car, and then fled on foot, according to the Department of Homeland Security. The suspect allegedly began to resist arrest and I quote, according to the DHS report, violently assaulted an officer when 2 other people, that means 2 other people in Minnesota, in the area, in Minneapolis, came out of a nearby apartment and attacked the law enforcement officer with a snow shovel and a broom handle, according to DHS. Minnesota State Agency said that they will also conduct a probe into the shooting, because at that point, after the broom handle was being swung, the officer took out his gun. He then shot the Venezuelan man in the leg, and then the 3, including the 2 that intervened, and the Venezuelan man then scurried off into the apartment, where officers who came later apprehended them. Minnesota State Agency said that they will also conduct a probe into this shooting. And the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension says it will conduct its own investigation on Wednesday, on the shooting from Wednesday, that will be in counterance, or not trying to counter, but will be going not with, but alongside, I imagine, a DHS or federal investigation, depending on how deep they want to pull those strings to investigate. BCA, that means, state authorities are already seen there, already on the scene there to process what's happening, to figure out all the details and such. So this shooting last night, we didn't get all these details. We didn't get details of other people jumping. We didn't get any details of somebody running away. We didn't get any of these details. All the details we got was ICE shooting. And then the idea was that 2 people were shot. Now we know that this man was shot in the leg. So at that moment, temperatures rose last night. And I had to watch as federal authorities had to go back and forth with protesters. They cuddled them. They fired less than lethal munitions quite frequently. They were pepperballing everyone they could. And that was going on last night as tensions continue to rise. And when you just have ice shooting after ice shooting these close to each other with so little cooperation and transparency from the federal authorities, well, the federal authorities will not cooperate with local authorities when it comes to investigation. They won't hand over physical evidence. So local authorities can't do their own investigation. They just have to trust Kristi Noem's department, the same Kristi Noem who immediately upon hearing what happened called it like a terrorist attack. Immediately was describing Renee Good like she was Osama bin Renee. And it's just not what happened. It's not the case. So how are you going to expect Minnesota locals to trust the government when they come out with a report like this? And this is the problem. If you come out and say things that are clearly false, oh, it was a terrorist attack. Oh, she was a terrorist. Well, maybe she was coordinating with X, Y, and Z. And you don't even just speculate wildly after a shooting. You just straight up lie, which was done by both the DHS head and the president of the United States to, of course, give it more prominence. Locals hear that. It's on the local press. It's on the local radio, local newspapers, as well as national newspapers. Kind of impossible to not hear that if you're a Minnesota local. And so when you see ICE and you see that lack of transparency, you're left with a lot of questions about that single mom with 3 orphan kids who was shot 3 times in the head. And so then you see them trying to conduct enforcement operations. Are you going to cooperate? When you don't trust the government, you don't think they're being particularly transparent with local authorities, and they're not the local police anyway. They're people not from the neighborhood. They don't know you. They don't know their neighbors, and they don't know the people that they're disappearing. Is that going to create an atmosphere of cooperation? No, it will not. And so the fact that people are not cooperating does not surprise me. The fact that people would feel so enraged as to go in and start swinging snow shovels at ICE agents, broom handles and such, and that they're not just like grabbing his hand trying to pull him away. I've seen that happen across the country. People trying to create avenues for them to get away, moving outside the way, and when they're running, not helping to trip them up. I have helping them up with their land, yelling at the ICE agents to leave them alone. I haven't seen a lot of physical force being used on the ICE agents themselves, but considering how tensions are rising, when it says the physical force to interfere with these enforcement operations, there's been less of those than the other types of interference. I would not be surprised if we see more and more of that rising in this community as trust has completely broken down. There was already a lack of cooperation between local authorities and ICE and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This lack of cooperation had ideological reasons, but also due to the behavior of ICE and due to a lack of trust of local authorities, a lack of trust that Trump has now displayed through not cooperating with them at all when it comes to investigations into these shootings. So this is a situation we find ourselves. There's no trust between federal authorities and local authorities, and any instance of violence, regardless of the details, is going to increase tensions. And if the details end up being particularly bad, then they ratchet up tensions particularly bad. And with so many agents operating, with their question about the quality of the training of those agents, the lack of cooperation with locals, from open hostility from locals, from a lack of transparency, a lack of trust, and a lack of coordination. All of this comes together to make it so I don't see the way out of this without Trump and the governor directly coordinating a ratcheting down of tensions. If that doesn't happen, the only way I see this going, if we have more repeat incidents, is with more violence on the street, which is why I think Tim Wolf is warning against it. Warning against it. Here's Hate Money. Thank you for the $10 in Hate Money. Hate Money, Anime Gaming 4057. Thank you very much. $10 in Hate Money. They have to ratchet down the tensions because the riots could get worse and worse. And instead of ratcheting down tensions, trying to find the way to, are we going to do immigration enforcement while respecting local authorities? Are we going to find a way to decrease tensions? Are we going to find a way so that, ICE is not having to cover up their faces to build a complete lack of trust because no one can even know their goddamn names because nobody wants to be associated with the movement with ICE right now? How do we move away from that to something that has some credible enforcement, some credible trust? Well, we've moved in a different direction as Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act to quell anti-ICE protests in Minnesota. Now, for those of you who don't know about the Insurrection Act, because you haven't been alive while it was called into service, I believe the last time it might have been called into service was when farmers were rebelling, like immediately after the American Revolution. But the Insurrection Act essentially allows the President of the United States to call the military into service to be deployed on American soil against American citizens. So this would give the President of the United States the means to deploy troops against U.S. citizens. So if he did deploy, if using the Insurrection Act, if he was successful in doing it, and it was not challenged in the courts and it was not stopped, this would mean you could have Marines, not National Guard. You could have U.S. Marines, you could have Army Rangers, you could have the Army rank and file patrolling the streets of Minnesota, trying to use them to, restore law and order. Mind you, at this point, there's been like 3 vehicles that have been burnt, maybe, right after this pressure cooker has cooked up. So we haven't gotten to a location where tons and tons and tons of property damage is being done, tons and tons and tons and tons of police officers are getting wounded or injured. We aren't anywhere near that. Yet Trump feels very comfortable threatening an Insurrection Act that was not threatened by people who have been in much worse scenarios. So he seems very quick to the trigger when it comes to the Insurrection Act. And that has led me to think, when you read Governor Tim Walz say something like, I know this is scary. We must speak out loudly, urgently, but also peacefully. We cannot fan the flames of chaos. That's what he wants. And then you hear the President of the United States talk about using the Insurrection Act. Could it be that Mike Waltz, if Trump uses the Insurrection Act, wants it to be as peaceful as possible to undermine his justification for sending it? So if he fails, then it will be an out-and-out failure. But if he succeeds in sending those troops, people will then see the streets and ask, why the hell are they even there? Why were they deployed? Especially if all the locals are yelling at them, saying, get out of our neighborhood. They're protesting them, saying, we want our own cops patrolling our neighborhood. We want our neighbors patrolling our neighborhood. We don't want people from West Virginia patrolling our neighborhood with rifles and in military uniforms like we're an occupied peoples. So, I mean, this could have potentially very negative backlash repercussions for the administration if they go through with it, which is part of the reason why I think right now they're still threatening it. Do I think Trump wants to do it? I think there's a possibility he wants to test the limits of his power. Trump was showing images of the windy city of Chicago in flames with helicopters coming in and U.S. soldiers with the caption, the city of Chicago is about to find out why we renamed it the Department of War, as if he was saying, we will bring war to the city of Chicago, right? If you talk this way towards communities constantly, I think that he's trying to build a consensus for something, for some action towards these blue urban centers, which also happen to be centers of opposition to the administration. I have yet to see him threaten to deploy any troops anywhere where Trump had a majority support in the area. 1991, Dylan, was the last time the Insurrection Act was used. Yes, I believe, actually, you're right. It was the Rodney King riots. I think you're right. You see 3 cars burn, and then we say it's the Rodney King riots. Well, that wasn't 1991. That was 1992. Thank you very much. 1992. So the Rodney King riots, where, I mean, a lot of people had their skulls like smashed in with cinder bricks, like truckers getting torn out of trucks in the chaos, having their heads like bashed in. Entire streets were burning. The fact that he's threatening the Insurrection Act now, when the only fatality is somebody who's been shot 3 times in the head by ICE, I mean, it seems like he's really quick to the trigger. It seems like he wants to. I think he wants to have a show of force, just like he talked about how owning Greenland is psychologically important to him. I think there's a psychological importance of being able to crush the opposition in this way, being able to show this type of force, carry out his operation of immigration enforcement, and being able to project that image of strength. I don't know if that is exactly the only image that would be projected. I think some people might see it actually as weakness, depending on needing to deploy troops for a community that, to put it quite frankly, is not on fire right now. And other people might see it as him being an authoritarian, needlessly deploying troops, especially if they go into a neighborhood that looks perfectly peaceable, that is telling you to leave. So the risk here that would come with invoking the Insurrection Act, especially at this stage, is immense. And so will Marco Rubio and others in his administration be able to keep him back from doing it, especially if there actually is 1 or 2 fatalities before the situation actually would spiral to a point where, hey, you would need the Insurrection Act. And that's something that would make the situation possibly worse.
There's no better time than now. They're ultimately trying to threaten the midterm elections. That's right around the corner. This admin is past the point of no return.